There's an absolute abundance of quality driving games on the PlayStation 1, but one game that has largely been lost to time has to be ray tracers. Now it's not your standard kind of racing, instead it puts a huge emphasis upon combat, which results in something entirely unique. It all revolves around a group known as the Tracer Team, who were sent to investigate a series of disturbances reported throughout the city. The story that's presented is just the kind you would expect from a 90s arcade title. That's not to say that it's not interesting, with many different characters playing a role and a conspiracy which slowly unfolds and manages to become quite intriguing. Nevertheless, what Ray Tracers gets right has to be its gameplay, which begins to feel a lot like Ridge Racer but with weapons and gigantic mechs. At the beginning you get the choice of several vehicles and an opportunity to get used to the rather loose handling and drift mechanics before setting off on your first mission. There's several types of objectives to complete, mainly ramming into your opponents and accumulating points, which results in a nitro boost. At the end of each mission you have to face down a boss, and this is where the game truly comes into its own. From helicopters that try to gun you down, to tanks and mechs which all possess their own health bars that you have to deplete. Now visually, even though it released in '97, it was nowhere near on par with its contemporaries, with significant pop-in and rather basic looking backgrounds, but as you're barreling down the streets it's something that you'll barely notice, and thankfully the frame rate holds up, which is so vital when it comes to games of this nature. Either way, if you're looking to try something that's easy to pick up and play, Ray Tracers is a solid option. The likes of Tekken and Dead or Alive have gone on to become some of the most recognizable franchises that began their life on the PlayStation 1, but the console was home to many more 3D fighters that sadly never made as much of an impact. One of them being a game known as Bloody Roar. It stars a cast of characters that all have the ability to transform into animals. As with most fighters, the story is completely passable, but the gameplay is where it's at. It's very fast paced, and your main form of attack is that of combinations, with it not being a game that's too much about strategy, but about running in and doing as much damage as you can. Whilst this may sound easy, it's not. Your computer controlled opponent has got just as much skill to put you through the ground if you don't utilize the defensive options as well. The special moves and the beast gauge transformations are the true stars of the game. Each character gives you the opportunity to change into a separate alter ego with a fierce animal quality. This leads you into a new set of moves, one for the human character and then another set for the alter ego beast. Choosing when to transform is vital to overcoming the enemy, and at times it can mean the difference between victory or defeat depending on when you use it. Now visually, each character is presented to near perfection. The frame rate at which the game runs makes it buttery smooth, which never gives way to slowdown or image breaker. Bloody Roar has many of the fighting game qualities that you would look for in a competent release. Don't be put off by the speed of the game, nor put off because it doesn't have a Namco or Capcom logo stuck to it. It can more than hold its own in a fight. Long before Tony Hawk's Pro Skater hit the PlayStation 1, a game known as Street Skater introduced players to the world of skateboarding, and although it never received the amount of critical acclaim as the various franchises that would precede it, it was still a very enjoyable experience. The basic gameplay would see you making your way through 3 separate levels that consisted of New York, LA and Tokyo, where you would have to reach the finishing line within a required time limit, or set a certain record by performing a wide selection of tricks. Each of these locations was split up into outdoor skating tracks and indoor halfpipes that would alter depending on the specific objective that's required. Plus, the more that you progress throughout the game, hidden paths in the levels will be unlocked as well, giving you access to more routes and more opportunities to reach those higher scores. Now there's up to 8 playable characters, each with their own special attributes and unique styles. Among the ranks is even a skateboarding monkey and a fucking rollerblading ninja. So this game kinda took a crap on realism, but that's part of why it's so much fun. Visually, Street Skater is actually quite impressive when considering its age. Each of the character models all possess a huge amount of variety, but it's the levels themselves that really steal the show. The impressive backdrops make each location feel like a believable space, which only adds to the overall quality of the game. Of course, it's not all lollipops and rainbows. If I'm being honest, the main aspect that lets Street Skater down has to be control. There is no support for analog. Another thing that is bound to piss people off is that you can't do tricks whenever you want to. They can only be performed when hitting a ramp, which in my opinion does let it down a lot. It's not a deal breaker though, it will take some time to get used to, but once you do, the flaws soon fade into the background. If you're looking for a new skateboarding game to get into on the PlayStation 1 and can overlook some of its shortcomings, Street Skater is a great option. In the Hunt is no doubt one of the best shooters that released on the PS1. The setup sees an evil organization known as the Dark Anarchy Society plotting to unleash a new super weapon upon the world unless their demands are met. In order to bring their schemes to an end, you take command of a submarine as you navigate your way through the seas and encounter an insane amount of enemies that will do nothing but try to stop you dead in your tracks. Moments of literal chaos are commonplace when making your way through the game, as it's not only enemies you need to worry about, but several environmental threats as well, such as falling rocks that will flatten you in a flash. Of course, with it being a shooter, you've got many ways to counteract everything that's thrown at you, from the trusty machine gun to missiles, a wave cannon, and a special weapon known as the crackshot that summons an unstoppable wall of bullets towards the enemy. In order to acquire these weapons, they are dealt out through power-ups, which are usually dropped upon taking someone out. It's a good idea to hold on to them as well, mainly for the more demanding boss encounters that soon go on to become one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game. Each of them are designed meticulously, both visually and mechanically, in order to force the player to think on the fly and overcome their distinct attack patterns with a strategy that will outwit their advances. Now, In the Hunt is quite a challenge and doesn't hold any punches. With one-hit deaths and a limited amount of lives, you can expect to struggle until you find your feet and get used to every option at your fingertips. Unfortunately, the game isn't that long though, and it's all over rather quickly. It can be completed in a few hours, but what helps the replay value is that there are several endings for the player to unlock. If you're a fan of shooters, In the Hunt is a no-brainer, and luckily it's now available on several modern consoles as well. When it comes to 2D fighters, the PlayStation 1 was no stranger to quality titles, with the likes of Street Fighter Alpha 3 and many others that made a huge impact. One that has largely been forgotten though is Gundam Battle Assault. The storyline is rather hokey and is completely forgettable, but when it comes to the individual fights, this is where the game really begins to shine. They take place as one-on-one battles, with each of the mechs having their own special attributes and weaknesses. You'll have your pick of 12 suits to start, with others becoming available after completing a certain requirement in the game itself. Whilst playing, there's a couple of things that you'll have to take notice of. First and foremost is the ammunition bar, located right underneath your name. Without question, this is a unique aspect, in which you're faced with having to reserve your projectile shots or risk running out of ammunition completely. A major complaint that any player will have is the lack of moves per character. Whilst this might not seem too bad, there is always a need for variety, and most of the suits only have an average of 7 moves total that they can do. Most of them can be done whilst on the ground or in the air, so once you've figured them all out, there isn't much else that you have left to see. But combos do still manage to play a huge role in each fight. Unfortunately, there's just not that many of them. If you've exhausted the usual fighters on the system and are a fan of the source material, Gundam Battle Assault is well worth picking up. Final Fantasy, Grandia, you know all of the normal RPGs. Guardian's Crusade, however, isn't exactly the most famous RPG out there, but it should be deemed as a classic and a great game nonetheless. You play the role of a knight who, after delivering a message for the town's mayor, comes across a strange but cute creature. A mysterious voice instructs the knight to deliver it to a location known as God's Tower. Now, from a technical point of view, Guardian's Crusade was actually quite advanced for its time. Whereas other games in the genre would rely on pre-rendered backgrounds, Guardian's Crusade instead deployed the same visual style throughout, regardless of if you were exploring a town or navigating the overworld. This consistent presentation really helps the world feel all the more immersive, and was a real accomplishment given the limitations of the PS1. Now, when it comes to gameplay, you can expect the standard RPG fare. You'll be visiting a variety of locales, ranging from villages to forests and mountains, that are all home to unique NPCs and enemies. This brings us to after the combat system, which is the real star of the show. It's a turn-based system that naturally revolves around a string of different abilities that help even the odds. There are two main aspects that help it stand out though. The first being the baby that needs to be fed and nurtured throughout the game, and depending on how you treat the baby, he will act differently in battle. If you're nice to him, he will transform into powerful beings. But if you're a prick, he won't listen to your battle commands at all, and may even attack you. It's a great mechanic that plays into the bond you'll make throughout the journey in a meaningful way. By no means is Guardians Crusade the best RPG on the PlayStation 1, but the several ideas that it introduced would help it stand the test of time, resulting in it becoming something that can be enjoyed even to this day. The first thing to mention when it comes to Heart of Darkness is the unforgiving nature of the game. It is extremely hard and is bound to even test the patience of the most proficient of players. Now the adventure sees you filling the shoes of Andy, a young boy who takes his dog Whiskey to a park, only for it to be stolen by dark forces that prompts him to devise a plan to save his beloved pet. The adventure is set out in a linear fashion and sees you visiting a huge variety of levels, ranging from sun-drenched canyons to the dark and dank depths of underground caves. There's a serious amount of variety, which really helps the world come to life and adds to the overall daunting atmosphere that the game creates. When it comes to gameplay, it can be a bit hit and miss. Honestly, this comes down to the rather archaic control setup that does take a while to get used to. It's often been referred to as the Dark Souls of platformers, and it's easy to see why. The platforming is tricky, taking into account the fact that in some stages you can easily fall down cliffs or lava pools due to strict jumping and even harsher traps that will completely catch you off guard. Throughout the adventure, Andy is pursued by a range of obstacles, may that be evil shadows or some of the more imaginative wildlife that will stop at nothing to deter your progression. Luckily, you have many ways in which to handle each of these threats, from simply running and jumping or climbing to safety, to more aggressive options such as a plasma cannon that can obliterate enemies in a flash. Graphically, Heart of Darkness isn't that impressive, except for one aspect that really helps it shine, that being the seamless transition into cutscenes which really help immerse you in the action. For example, you'll slowly be climbing up the side of a cliff, only for the camera to slowly pan out and reveal the vastness of the world. These little moments add so much to the cinematic quality of the game. If you're fond of platformers and can handle the challenge, Heart of Darkness would make a great addition to your collection. Fear Effect is an action-adventure that feels like a mix between Resident Evil and Blade Runner. It sees you controlling a team of 3 mercenaries who are seeking out a runaway girl in a neon-lit future Hong Kong with plans to ransom her back to a millionaire triad-leading father. Striking cel-shaded, manga-styled visuals, a growling synth score and punishing soundtrack that mixes up with your gunfire, and the heartbeats and heavy breathing of the game's much-vaunted fear meter make Fear Effect an absolute gem. When it comes to gameplay, it is distinctly rough. Especially for a newcomer, it might be quite hard to penetrate the at first odd setup of jumping from character to character without much warning, as well as the tank controls that won't be to everyone's tastes. Couple this with the various puzzles that litter the adventure, as well as the rather unforgiving difficulty, and Fear Effect becomes a real challenge. As you would expect, you've got a ton of options when it comes to taking on enemies, from utilizing a generous amount of weapons and also several defensive maneuvers that are guaranteed to help you out. But at the center of the gameplay is something known as the fear meter, which resembles an EKG. When the player is hurt, the green line of the EKG will pulse faster and turn red. It is possible to return it to normal by performing acts that will calm the character's heart rate. There are several actions that you can carry out to achieve this, such as solving a puzzle or sneaking behind a guard to perform a stealth kill. Fear Effect is a clear love or hate game. The steep learning curve, long-term health management, puzzles and separate characters may have the potential to turn some players away, but if you do, you'd be doing yourself a disservice, as Fear Effect's boldness in design and technology make it a thrilling and beautifully crafted adventure that everyone should experience. When it comes to RPGs, the PlayStation was a literal powerhouse. With releases like Final Fantasy VII, Vagrant Story, and Legend of Dragoon, players were spoiled for choice when it came to choosing their next adventure, but one that often got overlooked had to be a little gem known as Jade Cocoon. The world is largely split up into 4 separate forests that are all populated by a diverse set of monsters which roam the lands. It is here within these spaces that the narrative plays out, but unfortunately the story never reaches the highs that you would expect from an RPG. I'm not saying that it's terrible, but with a few adjustments it could have been one of the best aspects of the adventure. Now for what it lacks when it comes to narrative, it more than makes up for in gameplay. Of course, no RPG is complete without a solid combat system, and Jade Cocoon does not disappoint. It's turn-based in nature and allows the player to execute a variety of skills, which all range in their use once in battle. One addition that plays into what I mentioned earlier though are the several monsters that occupy each forest. Upon encountering them, it's possible to capture them and use their abilities to your advantage. If there's anything to compare it to, it would have to be Pokemon, as each of them are completely unique and can all be leveled up as you progress throughout the game. Because of this, the battle system has lent a serious amount of freedom when it comes to choosing your approach. Apart from basic offensive and defensive abilities, there's many elemental and stat affecting skills as well, which can really help out during some of the more challenging battles. To top all of this off, very much like Persona, each of the monsters can be fused with others to create even more formidable allies. It all comes together to create a truly engaging system that is bound to satisfy fans of the genre. Overall, Jade Cocoon is pretty short and doesn't offer that much in terms of replayability, but for the time that it does last, it is a compelling journey. Unlike most fighting games on the PlayStation 1, Bushido Blade is extremely unique. For a start, there are no life bars, no beating your opponents to a pulp, or being confined to an arena in which to battle to the death. It instead injected a severe amount of realism into the genre and revolved around the use of various weapons and mainly the concept of dueling. This is the truly outstanding part of Bushido Blade. Matches aren't timed, but can be just as quick and deadly if you're skilled in the art of playing this game. Each character is able to use any weapon in the game. The thing is, certain characters will be better with specific weapons, which means they have unique moves with those weapons that others don't. In addition to that, every weapon has a high, middle and low stance, which allows for many different attacks. With each hit your character takes without it being a death blow, your character will start to move slower and slower, which will most likely end in defeat. You can also handicap an arm or leg, so your opponent will either swing their sword really slowly, or they will have to fight on one knee, which can make for some pretty funny death blows. Besides a weapon and sub-weapon, you can use the dirt, mud or sand that's on the ground to blind your enemy. The one thing that Bushido Blade stresses and makes mandatory is you're following the code of Bushido. If you kill someone dishonorably, the game only lets you play halfway through and calls you dishonorable after the last round. If you never got round to it and are looking for something completely unique on the PlayStation 1, Bushido Blade will be right up your street. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and tickle that bell. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos as well and to take part in giveaways. You can also join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're at all interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.